Is this Tycho Alex? Mom, do I have to stay here?
Of course not.
You like it here, don't you?
Yes.
Do you remember those child stars from the 80s, the ones who vanished without a trace? Back then, these young faces lit up our living rooms, their stories woven into the routines of after-school TV and family nights. But what happened when the cameras stopped? Why did so many just disappear? You know that feeling when a face from your childhood shows up in a flash, and then it hits you that you have no idea where they went? That is Barrett Oliver. Back in the 1980s, this kid was the poster child for imagination. He played Bastian in The Never-Ending Story, a movie that basically defined fantasy for an entire generation. Barrett was not just a good actor. He was the boy in the movie where the school attic, a crumbling book, and a dragon named Falkor felt more real than your living room. For a lot of kids, that film was comfort. It was magic. And it was his face that carried all that wonder. And then, nothing. No sequels, no sitcom cameos, no magazine spreads. You would think someone that iconic would go on to be a fixture in Hollywood, maybe a supporting character in a soap opera, maybe a nostalgic cameo in a 90s Disney movie. But no. Barrett made just a few more film appearances, like Daryl and Cocoon, and then slowly stepped out of the spotlight. He did not vanish with scandal or controversy. He just walked away. Like he had finished telling his story, and that was enough. What makes it all a little more strange is that he was not pushed out by the industry. In fact, he had options. But while other child actors were chasing stardom, Barrett found a new obsession: photography. Specifically, something called 19th century printing techniques. Yeah, real film, antique cameras, hand-developed prints. While the rest of the world moved on to pixels and high definition, he got lost in glass plate negatives and vintage developer trays. And honestly, it kind of makes sense. He went from a boy reading a book that could shape reality to a man who shapes reality through a lens. That same quiet magic, just a different medium. Still, you cannot help but wonder what he might have done if he had stuck around. A grown-up Bastian in a reboot? A director bringing children's stories to life? Maybe he never needed Hollywood. Maybe Hollywood needed him. There was a time when every kid either wanted to be Punky Brewster or have her as their best friend. Soleil Moon Frye had that charm you could not fake, wide-eyed, fiercely independent, and way cooler than any adult in the room. She was the type of kid who would wear mismatched socks, rescue stray animals, and somehow always outsmart the grown-ups. She was not just a character. For a lot of kids watching in the 1980s, she was hope. Her show ran for years, and even when the cameras stopped, Soleil stayed busy. She did a few television guest spots, voice roles, even had a stint on Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But then came that slow fade. Not a crash, not a scandal, just a quiet slipping away from the center of things. You blinked and suddenly she was gone. Of course, life off-screen was not simple. Soleil hit puberty earlier than most girls, and Hollywood did not handle it well. Casting directors suddenly did not know what to do with her. That spunky tomboy label stopped fitting, and instead of growing with her, the industry just kind of let her drift. She wrote a book at 15, called Punky, I Shrunk the Kids, and it gave people a glimpse of just how much pressure she had been under. Later on, she became a documentary filmmaker. She turned the camera on herself, literally. Her project Kid 90 opened up her teenage diaries, voicemails, and old home videos, an unfiltered time capsule of what it really felt like to be famous as a kid in the 80s and 90s. It was raw, unpolished, and incredibly human. She showed us that the punky power we all loved was real, but so was the burnout that came after. And maybe that is why her disappearance hurt a little. It felt like losing a friend who had always made you feel stronger. She was not just another child star. She was the child star. The girl who looked like she could take on the whole world with a dog, a pair of high tops, and a snack from the corner store. And then she was gone. Just like that. If your family had a favorite sitcom in the 80s, chances are Growing Pains was right up there. And right in the middle of it all was Jeremy Miller, smiling, goofy, always ready with a comeback Ben Seaver. He was the little brother everyone either had or wished they did. A classic sitcom kid with the perfect balance of mischief and warmth. You saw him every week, and for a while it felt like he would always be there. But after the show ended, Jeremy kind of faded out. Not all at once. More like a slow dimming of the light. He made a few appearances here and there, some TV movies, a reunion special, but that spark from Growing Pains? It did not carry over. And while the other stars from the show found ways to stay in the public eye, Jeremy quietly stepped back. Behind the scenes, though, things were rough. Jeremy later revealed that he had struggled with alcohol abuse starting as young as 14. 14. It is one of those truths that hits hard, especially when you remember how many kids looked up to him. While fans were laughing along with reruns, he was fighting a battle no one saw. It took years before he opened up about it, and when he did, it was not just brave, it was heartbreaking. Jeremy eventually got help and later became a spokesperson for a recovery program. He was trying to make a comeback, trying to channel the pain into something good. But Hollywood did not really come calling the same way. He never had a scandal that lit up headlines. He never did anything outrageous or dramatic. He just slipped away, like a lot of child stars do, quietly, without a trace. And when you rewatch those old episodes now, there is a tinge of something else behind the laughs. That feeling of looking at a frozen moment in time, knowing what came after, but unable to change it. Jeremy Miller was more than just a laugh track in a sweater vest. He was a real kid in a very unreal world, and when that world moved on, it barely looked back. There was a time when the name Tina Yoders popped into your living room every week without fail. She played Jennifer Keaton on Family Ties, the youngest sibling, sharp-tongued, slightly sarcastic, and weirdly wise for her age. She was the grounded one in a house full of strong personalities. And let us be honest, standing out next to Michael J. Fox was no easy job, but somehow she held her own. Week after week, America watched her grow up in real time, right there on the family couch. But what happens when the couch is gone? When the lights dim, the scripts stop coming, and the world moves on? Tina finished out the series and disappeared. Not in a way that screams scandal or heartbreak, but in a way that feels more like slipping out the back door unnoticed. One day, she was a household name, and the next, you would have to Google her just to remember what show she was on. It was quiet. Almost too quiet. Part of the reason? Hollywood had no idea what to do with her once she stopped being the kid. She tried music, a rock band actually. Blonde hair, leather jackets, the whole vibe. But the industry never gave her the same spotlight she had as Jennifer. And unlike some of her co-stars, she did not chase roles just for the sake of staying seen. She also chose something that feels almost radical in the world of child stars: privacy. She focused on family. She stayed out of trouble. She lived a life most former celebrities would kill for, one with peace and no tabloid drama. And that, somehow, made her vanish even more. You do not realize how much someone meant to a show until you try watching it without them. Tina was the glue in Family Ties. She was the reminder that being the kid did not mean being forgettable. And even if the world forgot her for a while, that little spark she brought into every scene still lingers. It is not just nostalgia. It is recognition. Jennifer Keaton might not have gotten the spin-off. Tina Yoders might not have gotten the comeback. But she gave us something better: realness in a world of scripts. Brian Bonsel had one of those faces that was hard to forget. Wide eyes, slightly unsure smile, like a kid who knew he was walking into something way bigger than himself. He joined Family Ties during the later seasons as Andy Keaton, the youngest member of the family. By then, the show was already a hit, but Brian added this fresh, adorable energy that made the aging series feel new again. He was just a little guy, but man, he had presence. And then he was everywhere. Guest roles, television movies, even a part in Star Trek: The Next Generation. For a minute there, it looked like Brian Bonsel was going to be one of the rare child actors who kept going. The kind who grows into bigger roles, better scripts, and an adulthood in the spotlight. But that path took a hard turn. By the early 2000s, Brian had quit acting altogether. And the headlines that followed? They were not the kind you clip for a scrapbook. They were court dates, arrests, stories about substance abuse, violence, and a string of charges that painted a picture few fans were ready to see. The cute kid from Family Ties had grown up, but not in the way anyone expected. Still, buried under the mistakes was a story worth hearing. Brian later opened up about those years, saying that fame had hit too early, and life after it just unraveled. He started playing in punk rock bands. The Hollywood Polish was gone, replaced with gritty bars, tattoos, and music that screamed instead of smiled. And yet, through all that, there is this strange resilience to him, like someone trying to find something real after living in make-believe for too long. He is clean now, still making music, still figuring things out. You think back to those final seasons of Family Ties, and you can almost feel the weight of it, the pressure of being the kid who has to keep the show going. The audience never sees the real life ticking underneath that laugh track. Brian Bonsel did not vanish because he was forgettable. He vanished because fame was not built for kids like him. And what hurts is not just that he disappeared, but that when he reappeared, the world barely noticed. When Who's the Boss was in its prime, Danny Pentaro was the kid next door, literally. He played Jonathan Bauer, Angela's shy, sensitive son, and the character felt like a quiet heartbeat in a house full of bigger personalities. In a sitcom world that often demanded punchlines and catchphrases, Danny's role was different. He was thoughtful, sweet, sometimes awkward, and in that stillness, a lot of viewers saw themselves. Not every kid was the star athlete or the class clown. Some were just trying to figure it out. Off-screen, though, life was harder to figure out. Danny faded from the spotlight not long after the show ended. He did some stage acting, went to college, tried to live something like a normal life. But when you grow up on television, normal is a moving target. He came out as gay in the late 1990s, quietly, long before Hollywood was ready to handle it. There was no press tour, no big announcement, just a guy trying to be honest with himself. Years later, the headlines returned. Not for a comeback role, not for a directing credit, but because Danny revealed he had been living with HIV. He shared the news with grace, transparency, and a kind of steadiness that felt so familiar if you had watched him growing up on that little screen. It was a powerful moment, but it came and went in the way stories about former child actors often do, briefly trending, then forgotten. The hard truth is, by the time Danny told his truth, most of the world had already moved on. And yet, what sticks with you is not the drama. It is the gentleness, the courage in the quiet. That same soft presence he brought to Who's the Boss, a presence that made the show more human, more relatable, is still part of who he is today. He might not have headlines anymore, no red carpets, no sitcom revivals, but he matters. And maybe that is what disappearing without a trace really means. Not that you are gone, but that people stopped looking. There's a good chance you do not remember his name, but you definitely remember his face. Wide glasses, fur-lined coat, and that desperate, pleading line, "You'll shoot your eye out." Peter Billingsley was Ralphie, the Ralphie. And A Christmas Story was not just a movie, it was a ritual. It was Christmas morning in a snow-drenched living room with a plate of cookies and that one kid who just wanted a Red Ryder BB gun more than life itself. The strange thing is that one film should have made him a household name forever. And in some ways, it did. You see his face on t-shirts, ornaments, memes, even wrapping paper. But the person? The actor behind the glasses? He vanished. Quietly. Cleanly. Like snow melting the day after Christmas. Peter did a few more acting gigs after that, guest spots on television, a few commercials, but it was never the same. The problem with being part of a classic is that you stop being you. You become the character. And Ralphie, lovable as he was, cast a long shadow. So Peter pivoted. Instead of chasing the spotlight, he stepped behind it. He got into production. Worked closely with Jon Favreau. Had a hand in films like Iron Man and Elf. In fact, that dry, deadpan tone in Elf? That is him. He even directed a couple of projects. Quietly built a whole second act in Hollywood without ever needing to put the glasses back on. But fans never really caught up with that. To most of the world, he stayed frozen in that one Christmas, one role, one moment. And that is what makes his story so unique. He did not fall. He did not fail. He just changed. Quietly. Purposefully. While the rest of us kept watching A Christmas Story every December, he moved on. You have to wonder how that feels, to be everyone's childhood memory, but no one's current conversation. Peter Billingsley never really left Hollywood, but for the people who grew up with him, it feels like he disappeared. In the late 1980s, Nicole Edgar was the girl on the fridge. Not literally, but you know what I mean. Every teen magazine, every talk show, every lunchroom crush. She played Jamie Powell on Charles in Charge, and even if you did not watch the show religiously, you knew who she was. Blonde, confident, always ready with a quick line or a sarcastic look, Nicole had star power, the kind that does not wait in line. She was America's teen sweetheart for a hot minute, and then, poof, she popped up here and there afterward. A few made-for-TV movies, a recurring role on Baywatch. But the shine started to fade, and so did the offers. In a matter of years, Nicole went from center stage to somewhere on the margins, still working, but not famous. Then came the reality TV years, the ones no one really wants to talk about. Weight loss shows, tabloid headlines, personal struggles broadcast with dramatic music and commercial breaks. And that is when you realize this was not just another child star who stepped away. This was someone who tried to hang on, even when the grip hurt. Nicole later opened up about what it felt like to grow up in front of the cameras, the pressure to look a certain way, the unrelenting focus on her body. She revealed financial troubles, even took up work outside the industry. She became a single mom, started over, and did it all without the kind of comeback moment Hollywood loves to sell. She never spiraled, never made the scandal headlines people rubberneck for. Instead, she did something far less cinematic. She lived. Quietly and sometimes painfully, but truthfully. And that might be the hardest part for fans, because Nicole Edgar was a presence, a vibe, a whole aesthetic for a generation of kids figuring out what cool meant. Watching her fade out felt like watching the curtain close before the final act ever played. She is still around, still living her life. But the star from Charles in Charge? That girl everyone knew? She vanished. Not because she wanted to, but because sometimes the camera turns off before you are ready. You cannot say The Love Boat without thinking of that theme song. And if you stuck around for the opening credits, you always saw her. Jill Wheelan playing Vicky Stubing, the captain's daughter. She came on board as a kid, but stuck around for nearly a decade, growing up on screen as millions of families tuned in every week. She had the hair, the dimples, the sweet nature. Vicky was the heart of the show in a lot of ways, the innocence in the midst of all that romantic chaos. And then, when the ship docked for good, Jill Wheelan went quiet. She was not the type to chase paparazzi or stir up trouble, but that almost made her easier to forget. You would see her now and then, maybe a cruise line commercial, maybe a reunion episode, but for the most part she was gone from the public eye. What most people do not know is that Jill stayed closer to the ocean than to Hollywood. She worked with Princess Cruises as an ambassador, did a bit of radio, lived a regular life, or as regular as it gets after being in one of the most iconic television series of its era. She did face some rough patches, divorce, career shifts, trying to find work that felt meaningful while the rest of the world remembered her as a kid in sailor stripes. And that is the tough part. Once people lock in an image of you as a child, it is hard to reintroduce yourself as anything else. Jill never had that one big thing after the Love Boat. No blockbuster, no prestige television moment. She just lived her life, raised her family, took gigs here and there, and for fans who saw her as this constant, comforting presence every Saturday night, that quiet fade felt almost eerie. Because when you grow up on a television set, surrounded by scripts and applause, disappearing does not look like falling. It looks like real life. Bills, kids, peace, and maybe even happiness. Still, you cannot help but wonder what might have been. Jill Wheelan did not crash. She did not spiral. She just drifted out to sea, and the cameras never followed. Lisa Welchel was the kind of 80s icon who made it all look effortless. She played Blair Warner on The Facts of Life, the rich girl with the perfect hair, the sharp tongue, and a soft side that peeked through just enough to make you root for her. Blair was more than a character. She was a blueprint. Every show that came after with a glamorous, overconfident teen owes a little something to Lisa Welchel. She was everywhere for a while. Talk shows, awards specials, sitcom guest spots. She had the smile, the charisma, the look. But then she disappeared. And not in the usual child star way. There were no arrests, no breakdowns, no bitter interviews. Lisa just walked away. What most people did not realize is that she had already made her choice. She turned down more acting work. She refused a role on Friends. She left Hollywood at the height of her fame to focus on faith, family, and privacy. In the middle of all that glamour, she took a step most stars would not even consider. She left the spotlight because she wanted to. She became a Christian author, a public speaker, a homeschooling mom. For years, her life was more about church retreats and parenting workshops than red carpets. And she was fine with that. She built a whole new identity outside the industry that made her famous. But that choice came with a trade-off. For viewers, it felt like losing someone familiar. Blair Warner had been part of the weekly routine, like a sarcastic older sister who taught you life's tougher lessons. And when Lisa Welchel vanished, it was like a light went out in the room. She made a brief return on Survivor in the early 2010s, surprising everyone with her resilience and vulnerability. For a moment, it felt like a comeback, but even that felt like a visit, not a return. Lisa Welchel did not fall from fame. She stepped off it gently and deliberately, and in doing so, she became one of the rare child stars who did not get swallowed by it. Still, you cannot help but miss the way she used to light up the screen. Chad Allen was that rare mix of heartthrob and talent, one of those child actors who seemed to fit in anywhere. On Our House, he played the sensitive grandson in a multi-generational family. On My Two Dads, he showed up as the charming boy-next-door type. He had that windswept hair, the serious eyes, and the kind of presence that made casting directors feel like they struck gold. For a while, Chad Allen was teen television. He was the kind of actor who could break your heart with a look and make it okay again in the same scene. There was a real emotional fluency there, something that did not need a script to be felt. He had fans, he had momentum, he even had awards, and then he vanished. Part of that was intentional. Chad came out as gay in the early 2000s, but the outing was not on his terms. A tabloid outed him with a photo. At the time, that was still considered career suicide in a lot of circles. Roles dried up, casting calls slowed, and Hollywood, as progressive as it likes to seem, was not ready to make space for an openly gay leading man, especially one who had grown up in the public eye. So Chad took a different route. He turned toward activism, became a prominent voice in LGBTQ rights, went back to school, studied psychology. While the rest of the world waited for a comeback that never quite arrived, he was doing the hard, quiet work of becoming someone new. He officially retired from acting in 2015, not because he had to, but because he chose to. He said his purpose had changed, and that acting no longer felt like the right vessel for his voice. It is a story that is hard to tell without some sadness. Chad Allen had that thing, that spark. And it is easy to imagine a different world where he kept rising, kept shining, kept being part of the culture. But real life pulled him in another direction. The kid with the camera-ready smile and serious eyes turned into a man who wanted more than applause. And in the end, he vanished, not because he was forgotten, but because he needed to be found by something else. Robbie Rist had one of those careers that felt like a pop culture glitch. He joined the Brady Bunch at the tail end of its run, playing Cousin Oliver, the character that showed up just in time to get blamed for the show's decline. Unfair? Absolutely. But that is how fans remember him. The kid who came in with the bowl cut and big glasses, trying to inject new energy into a series already fading. He was the punchline in a joke he did not write, and somehow he stuck around anyway. His resilience got buried under the noise, but it never really cracked. Still, Robbie Rist was everywhere for a while. Guest roles on everything from Chips to The Bionic Woman. He even lent his voice to animated shows and commercials. And if you ever watched Kid Video, that weird Saturday morning mashup of cartoons and live-action music videos, you definitely heard him sing. But after that, Robbie Rist seemed to vanish. What most people missed was that he never really left. He just slipped into the background. He became a voice actor, a musician, a producer. He played Michelangelo in the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. Yes, that Michelangelo. You never saw his face, but his voice became part of a generation's memory. He also worked behind the scenes on independent films, played in bands, built an entire life doing what he loved, just not in front of a live studio audience. There is something strangely poetic about that. Robbie started as the kid who was too late for a beloved show. He got typecast, laughed at, written off. But instead of burning out, he transformed. He kept working, kept evolving. And yet, in the public's mind, he disappeared. Not because he failed, not because he fell apart, but because he became invisible on purpose. It is a reminder that not all vanishings are tragedies. Some are reinventions, some are escapes. And sometimes, the kid who got blamed for ending the Brady Bunch turns out to be one of the few who figured out how to survive it. If you were a kid in the early 90s, there was a good chance Miko Hughes gave you chills. He played Gage in Pet Sematary, creepy, tiny, unforgettable. Later, he delivered the famous "boys have a penis, girls have a vagina" line in Kindergarten Cop, and just like that, he was cemented in pop culture. Miko was not just cute, he had range. He could be terrifying, hilarious, and heartbreaking, sometimes all in the same scene. There was an intensity to Miko that most kids his age simply did not have. He could steal a scene without raising his voice. He worked a lot after that. Guest spots, horror flicks, and even a small but powerful part in Mercury Rising. Directors loved him. Audiences remembered him. And then, silence. Not dramatic silence. Not the scandal kind. Just the kind where one day he was everywhere, and then he was not. No big announcement. No meltdown. Miko just slipped away. Part of it was growing up. Hollywood has never been great at helping child actors make the jump to adult roles. The parts dried up. The spotlight faded. And before anyone could ask where he went, the world had already moved on. But Miko never stopped working entirely. He did some voiceover, small films, and conventions. He even directed a short film. Still, most people only remember him as that unsettling little boy with the soft voice and intense stare. What makes his disappearance so quiet is that it mirrors the roles he played. Blink, and he is gone. But when you see him again, that face still pulls something out of you. Nostalgia, unease, curiosity. Miko Hughes did not burn out. He did not crash. He just grew up in the shadows of the roles that made him. And that kind of legacy is hard to outrun. Before Shannon Doherty was breaking hearts and clashing with co-stars on Beverly Hills 90210, she was a kid in braids on Little House on the Prairie. Sweet-faced, a little shy, and totally believable, she joined the show in its final seasons. Even then, there was something magnetic about her. You could not look away. There was this quiet steel behind her eyes, like she already knew the industry she was stepping into. Even when she was just delivering lines in a prairie dress, she looked like she belonged in front of a camera. It was clear she had the kind of presence directors dream about, But after Little House, things shifted fast. She went from being the quiet kid to the firebrand teen, and her earlier work got swallowed up by what came next. That early role gets forgotten, buried under bigger, messier chapters. But her time on Little House showed a completely different Shannon, one that was still learning the ropes, still growing into the spotlight. She was not the drama. She was just a kid with a big future. The strange part is that no one really talks about that early version of her. Fans skip right to the headlines, the scandals, the stories that made her infamous. But when you rewind the tape and watch her younger self, you see the roots, the softness, the raw talent, and maybe, just maybe, a little of the weight that was already starting to form on her shoulders. Her disappearance from those early roles is not just about time. It is about how we choose to remember people. Shannon did not vanish in the traditional sense. She just got edited. And the girl who once stood quietly on a prairie set now lives mostly in forgotten footage. Sometimes, fame is not what overshadows you. It is what erases the parts that came before. Jenny Kuan came into the scene with energy, color, and a voice that could stop you mid-scroll. On California Dreams, she played Samantha Wu, the keyboardist with killer vocals and serious stage presence. It was a teen sitcom wrapped in a band storyline, think Saved by the Bell meets pop rock, and Jenny stood out. She had this cool factor that did not feel manufactured, like someone who could hold her own on stage and still laugh with you at lunch. Even when the script was cheesy, she brought something grounded and real. Her character was bubbly, but not annoying, strong without being cold. And when she sang, you believed every word. For kids in the early 90s, she was a reason to tune in. The show was light, but her presence added something real. After the series ended, she made a few appearances, voice work, especially in anime. She even toured with musicals. But the mainstream spotlight? It moved on fast. Jenny did not crash or walk away. She just never got another role that matched the spark of her California Dreams days. The kind of momentum she had deserved more. A lead, a drama, a second act. Instead, her career became scattered bits, strong but brief, enough to make you wonder what could have been, enough to make her absence feel personal. It is tough watching someone with that much presence quietly fade, especially when they had more to give. Jenny Kuan's voice was not just strong, it was hers. And Hollywood never really gave it a second chance. She did not vanish because she lacked talent. She vanished because sometimes, even when the dream is loud, the industry just is not listening. Danny Lloyd gave one of the most iconic performances in horror history, before he even knew what horror was. As little Danny Torrance in The Shining, he whispered red rum into our nightmares and stared blankly into a future he could not escape. But off-camera, Danny Lloyd was not haunted. He was just a child with a quiet voice and a curious mind. And when the cameras stopped rolling, he did not chase the fame. He simply went home. He was only 6 years old when Stanley Kubrick cast him. Kubrick famously shielded him from the darker parts of the film, never letting him realize just how terrifying his role was. That protection became prophetic. Because after one more acting job, Danny Lloyd left Hollywood entirely. No talk shows, no press tours, no desperate clinging to a child role, just a vanishing act that felt almost supernatural. He became a biology professor, a husband, a father. He spent decades away from the limelight, content to live in a world where no one recognized his face, only his kindness. When he finally gave an interview years later, it was not to reclaim fame, but to reflect on how grateful he was for a normal life. One where he could grow up, finish school, and become someone beyond the boy who rode a tricycle through a haunted hotel. It is easy to forget that behind every iconic child role is a real child. And sometimes, the best twist in a horror story is that the kid made it out, safe, happy, whole. Danny Lloyd disappeared, but not because he was lost, because he was found. Buzz Murdoch was the heart of Route 66, not just the co-lead, but the soul-searching drifter whose bond with Todd turned the open road into a mirror. Played by George Maharis, Buzz was strong-willed, street-smart, and never afraid to challenge the world. He was not just a traveling companion, he was a brother in arms. And then, in the middle of the journey, he was gone. The show gave a weak explanation. Buzz was in the hospital. But that hospital stay became permanent. He never returned, never wrote, never got a goodbye. He just vanished from the highway. There was no roadside visit, no final voiceover, no letter from the bedside. Just the stillness of empty passenger seats and a character-shaped hole the show refused to acknowledge. For a series built on movement, the way Buzz stopped moving was painfully abrupt. It felt like America had lost one of its own sons, and no one paused to notice. In real life, Maharis left due to health issues and contract disputes. The producers replaced him with a new character, but the chemistry never recovered, and fans felt it. Because Buzz was more than a sidekick, he was the heartbeat of a show that promised meaning in every mile. His absence turned the road a little colder, the journey a little emptier, and it taught us something that no rerun can erase. Sometimes the ones who carried the weight disappear, and all we are left with is the echo of their footsteps in the dust. Dr. Miguelito Loveless from the Wild Wild West was the kind of villain who did not just scheme, he performed. Small in stature but massive in presence, Dr. Loveless was a theatrical genius, a megalomaniac with dreams bigger than the sky. He returned episode after episode, each time with a more outrageous plan and a more dangerous machine. He was not just the main antagonist, he was the show's twisted heartbeat. And yet, his story ended not with a bang, but with a footnote, a mention that he died of ulcers, off-screen. After years of being outsmarted, outrun, and nearly unstoppable, the show wrote him off with a single sentence. No epic confrontation, no resolution, just a shrug from the writer's room. Fans felt robbed. Loveless had earned his downfall. He had earned a moment. Instead, he was denied closure. Maybe the network thought he had outstayed his welcome. Maybe the showrunners did not know what to do with a character who constantly overshadowed the heroes. But the truth is, Dr. Loveless was too good to vanish that way. He was the brain behind the madness, the star of his own evil opera. To remove him off screen was like ending a symphony with a dial tone. Even now, people debate whether it was the right call, whether it was respectful. But one thing is clear: justice was not served. And for a villain so obsessed with legacy, being forgotten was the cruelest ending of all. Mike Vitar was the kind of kid who made every summer feel like it could last forever. As Benny the Jet Rodriguez in The Sandlot, he was a symbol of speed, freedom, and the unbreakable magic of childhood friendship. And in the Mighty Ducks sequels, he brought that same fire to the ice. He was not just playing characters, he was becoming memories, the kind that stuck with you long after the credits rolled. But somewhere between the bases and the blue lines, Mike disappeared. There was no farewell press tour, no dramatic scandal, just a quiet exit in the late 1990s, as if he had run the bases one last time and never looked back. While the world was still quoting his lines and wearing Sandlot t-shirts, Mike was stepping into a new uniform, one that would define the rest of his life. He became a firefighter, a real one, not a role, not a scene, a life-risking, people-saving, dawn to dusk kind of job. It is the kind of pivot that tells you something about who he truly was. Fame might have found him, but it never changed him. And while the industry kept calling, Mike had already answered a different kind of call. There is something poetic about that. A child star walking away not out of failure, but out of purpose. He did not want to be remembered. He wanted to matter. And maybe that is why his disappearance feels less like a loss and more like a story we were lucky to witness, even if only for a while. Because some heroes do not wear costumes on screen. Some wear helmets and carry hoses. Mandy Hampton was a sharp, ambitious political consultant introduced in Season 1 of The West Wing. She had presence. She had tension with Josh. She had promise. Then Season 2 arrived and Mandy was gone. Just gone. No farewell. No resignation. No tragic exit. Her name was never mentioned again. The show simply moved forward, as if she had never occupied the West Wing's halls. Viewers were left confused, scanning episodes for clues, wondering if they had missed something. But there was nothing to find. It was not a plot hole. It was a decision. She had been a central figure in strategy meetings, conflict arcs, and staff relationships, and yet her desk vanished like it had never been there. The very tone of the show shifted, sealing off the part of its world where she used to exist. Her disappearance created a vacuum, not just in the office, but in the show's moral complexity. For a series that prided itself on transparency and consequence, Mandy's erasure felt like a cover-up. A show that preached the power of process refused to process her exit. In a world where every character's arc had meaning, Mandy was reduced to an error. And in doing so, the show broke its own rules of narrative justice. Creator Aaron Sorkin later said the character just did not work, but the lack of resolution turned Mandy into one of television's strangest ghost stories. In a show filled with gravitas, consequences, and emotional depth, her disappearance left a quiet wound. What kind of message does that send when even the sharpest women in politics can be erased without a word? Count Manzepy from the Wild Wild West was not your typical gunslinger villain. He was a magician, a manipulator, and a master of mystery. Played with theatrical brilliance, he brought a surreal, almost supernatural flair to a show otherwise rooted in steampunk espionage and Old West grit. Manzepy wielded illusions and black magic like weapons, making him more than just another schemer. He was a threat that bent the laws of reality. In his second and final episode, he escaped in a flourish of smoke and sorcery, setting the stage for a grand return. He was like a ghost wrapped in velvet, capable of reappearing whenever the story needed something truly unhinged. Audiences were waiting for that third act, but the curtain never rose. But that return never came. No arrest, no battle, no conclusion. He was never seen or mentioned again, not even as a rumor in passing. And for a villain so extravagant, that silence was deafening. Fans were left hanging in a spell that never ended. Why introduce such a flamboyant antagonist if you had no plans to finish his story? Was he too strange? Too supernatural? Or did he steal too much of the spotlight? Manzepy felt like he belonged to a different show entirely, one filled with haunted mirrors and cursed relics. But that was the magic of him. He pushed the boundaries. And just as he was becoming a recurring nightmare for our heroes, he vanished into narrative smoke. No curtain call, no justice, just forgotten tricks and a lost opportunity. Manzepy's disappearance is a perfect example of a show afraid to chase its weirdest idea to the end. And what a loss that turned out to be. Lisa Jakob was the girl you could believe in. The rebellious daughter in Mrs. Doubtfire, the panicked teen in Independence Day. She had a rare kind of authenticity that made every character feel personal. She was never the loudest in the room. She was the realest. But sometimes the realest ones are the first to realize that something is wrong. Lisa's exit from Hollywood was not a scandal. It was a quiet refusal, a soft rebellion, a truth spoken out loud. By age 14, she was told she could not return to her school because filming conflicted with attendance. Robin Williams even wrote a letter to try to help her stay. But the message was clear. Being an actor meant choosing performance over personhood. Lisa never forgot that. The dissonance between who she was and who she was paid to be grew louder with every role. Eventually, she chose to leave. She moved away from the industry toward a life that made more sense. Writing, advocating, healing. Like Mara Wilson, Lisa began to speak openly about anxiety, trauma, and the quiet devastation of child fame. Her memoir, You Look Like That Girl, does not glamorize the past. It reclaims it. It turns a fading spotlight into a candle. Gentle, true, and still burning. We remember her face from film, but it is her voice in print that lingers longer now. And maybe that is the story beneath the story, that sometimes disappearing is not vanishing. It is transforming. It is taking your own name back. Luke Ventura worked with Al Bundy at the shoe store in season 1 of Married Dracula with Children. He was cocky. He was charming. He was the anti-Al, a smooth-talking bachelor who made women swoon while Al trudged home to Peg and the kids. Luke brought a certain energy to the early episodes, but after season 1, he disappeared without a trace. He was never fired, never transferred, never mentioned. One day, he was just not there. The shoe store remained, but Luke was scrubbed from its history. He had punchlines, chemistry, and an established presence. Then the credits rolled and erased him. There was no locker left unclaimed, no spare chair that made characters pause. His exit was not a moment, it was a deletion. And the silence made it feel like he had never existed at all. Some say the character was too similar to Al. Others say the chemistry did not quite land. But what sticks is the absence. Because Luke was part of those earliest episodes, part of the first impressions that made viewers stick around. And then he was gone, like a coworker you never said goodbye to. Maybe the show found its rhythm by losing him. Or maybe, just maybe, the world of Married with Children is littered with ghosts we barely remember, but once laughed with. How many of them are still standing at the shoe counter waiting to be written back in? Buzz Hickey from Community was not just another eccentric professor at Greendale. He was a man of mystery, regret, and quiet fury. Played by the ever-intense Jonathan Banks, Hickey brought a weight to the show that no other character could. He was the kind of man who said little but carried a lifetime of hard lessons in every glare and grumble. Season 5 let him breathe, even if just barely. He connected with Abed. He opened up, bit by bit, revealing a past full of discipline, distance, and deep emotional fractures. And then, just like that, he was gone. Not even a slow fade. No final bow. By season 6, Buzz Hickey was only a photograph on a memorial wall, dead, forgotten, and brushed aside with a line of exposition that felt colder than any eulogy. No one said how he died. No one shared what he meant. It was a brutal exit for a character who brought so much depth to a show, often dancing on the edge of absurdity. He had the makings of a quiet icon, an unlikely father figure for the lost and the broken. And to erase him without care was to erase the heart he gave to the chaos. Some say Jonathan Banks left for Better Call Saul. But even if that is true, what was stopping Community from giving him a farewell worthy of the name? Hickey was not a punchline. He was a wounded soul. And the lack of closure felt like a betrayal, not just of the character, but of the audience who saw something human in him. His disappearance was not justice, it was indifference. And in a show obsessed with honoring tropes and meta-references, it is ironic that Buzz Hickey was treated like a trope himself. Here one season, gone the next. Just another ghost in Greendale's halls. Michael Oliver was the kind of kid who could turn chaos into comedy. As Junior in Problem Child, he was everything the title promised. Wild, loud, hilarious, and just a little dangerous. He was not your typical sweet-faced Hollywood kid. He was a troublemaker you could not help but love. And then, like the perfect punchline to a joke we did not see coming, he was gone. His exit was sudden, but the signs were always there. The Problem Child films made money, but they also made problems. Legal disputes, managerial chaos, allegations of financial exploitation. Behind the scenes, Michael's world was unraveling before it even had a chance to begin. By the time he was a teenager, the industry had already burned him out. He did not just step away, he stepped back into anonymity. And he has rarely looked back. Today, Michael lives far from Hollywood's orbit. He is not trying to reclaim fame. He is not on reality shows or writing tell-all books. He is just living, quietly, on his terms. And that silence says more than any interview could. It says he chose peace over applause, privacy over profit. That, maybe the only happy ending left for a child actor, is to become someone the world forgets. It is easy to think of these stars as lost, but maybe they are not lost at all. Maybe they just escaped. And in Michael's case, maybe disappearing was the bravest thing he ever did. Dr. Mark Piper stood on the edge of something historic in Star Trek, the original series. He was the chief medical officer aboard the Enterprise in the show's second pilot episode, Where No Man Has Gone Before. Calm, logical, and seasoned, Piper gave viewers their first glimpse into how medicine might work in the final frontier. He patched up Captain Kirk, delivered crucial insight during a psychic breakdown, and handled danger without ever losing his cool. He was, by every indication, going to be an integral part of the crew. He was there before the uniforms changed, before the catchphrases were iconic, before the mission was fully defined. For many, he represents the lost blueprint of what the show could have been. But when the show officially launched, he was gone. No farewell, no transfer, no reason. He simply vanished, replaced by the fiery and emotionally charged Dr. Leonard McCoy. The show made no effort to explain the swap. Piper was never mentioned again. The baton was passed behind the scenes, not on screen. Some viewers assumed he had been reassigned. Others thought perhaps he had died, but nothing was confirmed. It was as if the second pilot had existed in a parallel universe, close enough to matter, but distant enough to be forgotten. Piper's disappearance is especially striking in a show known for continuity, mythology, and fan dedication. It is a reminder that even in the most detailed universes, some characters are casualties of early creative decisions. What does it say about legacy when the very first Doctor on the Enterprise is now just a footnote in a pilot most fans barely remember? Santiago Herrera from Friday Night Lights was not just another player on the field. He was the comeback story, the underdog, the troubled teen Coach Taylor took a chance on. Santiago had no stable home, no future, until football entered his life. And then, through grit and guidance, he began to change. Fans saw it. They rooted for him. He had raw talent, a rough past, and real potential. But just as quickly as he entered the narrative, he was gone. Season 2 ended, and with it, Santiago vanished. No farewell, no injury, no new school, no word. It was like he had never been part of the team at all. The show never addressed it, not once, not even in passing. And that silence? It was devastating. Because Santiago's story mattered. His redemption arc was more than football. It was survival. It was proof that the right mentor could make a difference. To see that wiped away without closure was heartbreaking. Fans were left with nothing but speculation. Did the writers change course? Did the actor leave? Or was his arc just deemed unimportant? Whatever the reason, it was a disservice to the character and to the viewers who believed in him. When a show like Friday Night Lights, so deeply grounded in emotional truth, abandons a story mid-stride, it leaves a hole. Santiago deserved more. And every time we rewatch, we are reminded not of his plays, but of the silence that followed him off the field. Cory Hay did not just define the 80s, he was the 80s. With his wild grin and soft vulnerability, he was the teen idol who made every awkward kid feel seen. The Lost Boys, Lucas, License to Drive, he was everywhere. And yet at the height of his fame, Cory was already crumbling. The camera loved him. The system did not. Addiction found him early. Fame made it easier to hide. The sparkle that once made him shine started to look like a warning light no one wanted to notice. He tried to get clean, again and again. But the weight of being a star before you are even fully formed, it never really leaves. His friendship with Corey Feldman became its own tragic echo. Two kids trying to survive an industry that offered no protection. Cory Hay wanted so badly to be okay. You could see it in his interviews, in the way he talked about his childhood, about how he missed being a person, not a product. In 2010, he died from complications related to pneumonia. But everyone knew that the long war with addiction had written the earlier chapters. He was just 38, a boy frozen in time, never really given the space to grow up before the world asked too much of him. Cory Hay disappeared long before he died, and that may be the saddest part of all. John Bennett was a correctional officer in Orange is the New Black, But to Daya, he was more than a guard. He was her escape plan, her secret, her baby's father. Bennett began as a sympathetic character in a harsh environment, torn between duty and love, desperately trying to protect Daya from the cruelty of prison life. When she became pregnant, he stood by her. At first, he proposed with a ring hidden in a cupcake. He tried to do the right thing, but as the pressure mounted, Bennett cracked. After season 3, he drove away from the trailer where his future family lived and never came back. His absence was not just felt, it was deafening. One moment he was ready to change everything, and the next he became another man who disappeared before he could be held accountable. No visit, no letter, no final confrontation. The show never fully explained where he went or why. A few vague mentions, rumors that he had abandoned them, but nothing concrete. The absence was staggering. For a show known for digging into trauma and complexity, his disappearance felt like a betrayal of its own storytelling. Behind the scenes, the actor had scheduling conflicts and other commitments, but in universe, his vanishing act left a permanent wound. Daya was forced to face motherhood alone. The baby became a symbol of promises broken, and viewers were left holding questions with no answers. What happened to the man who said he loved her? And how many times can a woman be abandoned before the world stops calling it accidental? Detective Daniels from Brooklyn. 9-9 is one of television's most peculiar ghosts, not because she died or even because she was erased, but because she never really had a chance to live at all. She appeared in the pilot episode, introduced confidently alongside the rest of the squad. She had a badge, a desk, a role. But after that first episode, gone. No explanation, no reassignment, not even a name drop in a hallway scene. For a show built around camaraderie and quirky workplace bonds, her disappearance was like a glitch in the foundation. Fans noticed instantly. Where did she go? Why was she never mentioned again? Theories popped up. Maybe the actress left, maybe the writers restructured the ensemble, but none of them answered the real question. Why bring her in at all if she would be cast out without cause? She was a mystery wrapped in silence, and that made her more unsettling than any plot twist. Daniels was not a villain, but her vanishing act echoes the same unresolved tension. A presence erased, a potential path abandoned. She is the kind of character that forces us to think about how disposable people can become in the mechanics of storytelling. You blink, and suddenly they are gone. Not with a bang, but with an edit. And in a show that prided itself on emotional depth and justice, even comedic justice, Daniel's unexplained exit feels like unfinished business, like a question the precinct was never allowed to ask. Dana Plato was America's big sister. As Kimberly Drummond on Different Strokes, she brought heart, warmth, and grace to a sitcom that dared to tackle hard truths. She smiled through the screen like someone who had it all together, but the truth behind her eyes told a different story. Fame came quickly, too quickly, and it never taught her how to hold on to herself. After Different Strokes, the offers stopped. The industry moved on. Dana did not. She fought hard to stay relevant, to find herself in a world that had already moved past her. Her choices became more desperate. She posed for tabloids, took roles she would rather forget. And all the while, the girl who once made us laugh was slowly unraveling. Addiction wrapped around her like a shadow she could not shake. She tried to get clean, tried to come back. But the pressure of being famous and forgotten is its own kind of poison. By 34, Dana Plato was gone. A tragic overdose ended her life, and with it, a chapter of television history that still feels unfinished. She died just a day after telling a radio show she was finally turning things around. We like to believe child stars live charmed lives. Dana reminded us that charm can be a mask, that behind every laugh track there might be a cry for help we cannot hear. Her story is not just a cautionary tale, it is a heartbreak that never quite stopped echoing. Lorie Foreman was the big sister you loved to hate on that 70s show. Sarcastic, manipulative, and endlessly flirty, She was the queen bee of basement drama. Lorie added chaos to the Foreman household in all the best ways, but after season 3, she simply disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye. When she did return in season 5, she was played by a different actress, and just as quickly, she vanished again. The show moved on, like Lorie had never left her mark on Point Place. No one even blinked. She was not just a punchline, she was an emotional bomb waiting to go off in every room she entered. Her presence made Eric weaker, Kitty more nervous, and Red quietly furious. She was the part of the family that was never stable, and that was what made her essential. Without her, the Foremans felt safer, but a little less real. In real life, her original actress was reportedly dealing with personal struggles, and the show recast her to keep the storyline moving. But the final vanishing left a strange echo, one that felt unfinished. Lorie was a complicated character, but she was also real. She represented rebellion, bad decisions, and the uncomfortable truths about growing up. To see her erased without comment, without conclusion, left a void that was never quite filled. How do you close the door on someone who made the house feel alive? If any of these forgotten faces made you stop and feel something, like the video, hit subscribe, and help us keep these stories from disappearing for good.